was 22 years old when I came to prison.
I was 30 years old when I went to prison.
I was at the age of 19. I had just turned 19.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I help life-sentenced men transition from institutionalized prison life back into society. Every one of our men has already served 25 to 45 years in prison. I serve on the board of the Corrections Transition Program at Everglades Correctional Institution in Miami, Florida. I teach these men life skills and how to speak, listen, and think, so when they get paroled, they become assets to their communities rather than liabilities of the state. Welcome to Men Going Home. I'm Chris Wolfe, and we've got another great show for you today because we are the only show that brings you access to a segment of society very few people know anything about. Men who have spent more than 25, 35, and even 40 years in prison. We'll talk to them about their crimes, their life in prison, and what their transition back into the free world was like after all those years. Now, before we welcome our special guest, please welcome back my good friend and co-host of this show, Andy Korge, who's been traveling to Arizona and California over the past 2 weeks. Welcome back, Andy.
Thanks, Chris. You know, I was traveling, and obviously you had some incredible interviews while I was gone. I'm sorry I missed them.
We did.
And maybe we'll talk a little bit about them. And very eager to meeting David Goodwin here and talk a little bit about his story.
Yeah, we interviewed Richard Jackson, and then last week was Anthony Venecia. Your take on Anthony's interview?
Well, Anthony, he made one big mistake. He started smoking marijuana. And that started sort of the path that led to him just sort of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
And it was a very sad story. But, as we hear often on this program, poor choices, and he made a poor choice.
Bad choices and bad decisions to go into an altercation with a gun in the car. And a lot of times, not good things happen.
Yeah. And, a crime of passion.
Correct.
And we hear about it all the time in America. And he was a victim of that at a very young age with a woman he probably shouldn't have been with.
Let's introduce today's guest. Our guest today was sentenced to death in 1977 after 3 first-degree felony murder convictions at the age of 30, and he spent 3.5 years on Florida's death row. He actually lived in a cell on death row next to convicted serial killer Ted Bundy, and spent a total of 41 years in Florida's most violent prisons. And he is here today to tell his fascinating story about the Sandy Creek murders of 1977 and his conviction. Please welcome our friend, Mr. David Goodwin. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, sir. So good to be here.
How was your trip down from Tampa this morning?
A great trip till you get to Miami, and I remember why I said I'd never live here.
Traffic's pretty bad, huh?
It's horrible.
Yeah, it is.
David, you were born and raised in Panama City, Florida, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what's interesting about your childhood is that apparently you liked school, you were a good student, and you were tested in 5th grade, had a 130 IQ, correct?
Yes.
Which is amazing because only 2% of the population has an IQ of 130 or more. How did that affect your early life?
I did not actually find out until a pre-sentence investigation was did on me after the conviction and before they sentenced you. And that's when I found out. Up to then, I did not know. One of the ways that it influenced me was a failure to know it in high school. My dad had one thing. His kids were going to finish high school. I seen kids carrying books home from school, and I thought, well, I don't do none of that. But I brought them for about a semester, didn't open them, found out I could handle it without doing it,
Right.
and so I quit bringing books home.
So you were a great student?
I to hear it.
And you also had a very religious upbringing. Pentecostal church, went to church 2-3 times a week, correct?
At least 2 or 3.
I believe your father said, hey, I know what you and your brothers are doing with girls these days. You're getting a little bit older. So if you're going to put your feet under my dinner table, you're going to have to go to church on Sunday, correct?
That's absolutely.
Yeah.
They put one of my brothers out of the house for failure to do so.
Your father
While
was
I was still in high school, I might add.
Wow.
and your father was a very hard-working man. I believe he and your
Hard-working.
mother both had eighth grade
Eighth
educations.
grade education.
He had several jobs to put food on the table.
As many as 3. But that was also with 3 was in order to pay his tithes. That's how he was as a Christian.
And he gave 10%, even though money was tight, he gave 10% of everything he earned to the church, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, here's a question.
Or more.
Well, here's a question for you, because I believe he also pushed the envelope a little bit. He was a bootlegger, no?
He was actually he left home at 13 and started making moonshine for his older brother who was running. He got some jail time. The older brother actually did a couple years in prison for it.
So that 10% of all his money to the church included the bootleg money, I'm sure?
Well, when he was doing that, he wasn't doing anything else. He had gave that up.
Right. Interesting, because I reviewed your story, and there were certain things that formed who you are as a person. And at a very young age, you realized that your family was poor. I believe in 7th grade, something happened, and you realized you were poor.
Actually, in the 5th grade, I had something to happen. And when I got in the 7th grade, we lived near a military base, and the kids from there dressed stylish. London Fogs, what was it there with the multicolored shirts that bled. I took a paper route in order to dress myself. My dad, every school year, we'd get 3 new shirts, 3 new pair of pants, package of underwear and socks, and shoes as needed. So I wore these little pullover shirts and jeans until I got in the 7th grade and went to work so I could buy my own.
But I believe in 7th grade there was a field trip, and the
That
cost was only
grade, actually.
it was 25 cents
to go to the Mariana Caverns. If you're from that area over there, it's well known, and it's a tourist thing for Florida as a whole. Mariana Caverns.
And you didn't want to ask your parents for 25 cents because you thought that might, be a little too much.
It was.
Right. So I think that sort of formed who you are. And as later life with some marijuana dealing, I think you were always very concerned with the financial security of your family.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So obviously you graduated from high school. You got married early at age 18.
Yes.
Any children from that marriage?
That was the first one, Robbie. She was actually born a week before one of my brothers died in another accident, broke his neck. He had been to boot camp, came back, was going to Texas, and some last-minute training for Vietnam, and dove off in a swimming hole we'd been into 1,000 times, broke his neck, paralyzed from neck down. 36 hours later, he was dead.
So you got divorced because you got married very young.
Yes.
Several years later, you got married again at 21. You had 2 more children?
Yes.
All right. So now you're working full-time, and you're working full-time at Tyndall Air Force Base?
Federal Civil Service as a civilian on Tyndall Air Force Base.
And you're also taking classes at Florida State University?
No, actually, I had started at Gulf Coast Community and had got out of there when I got married.
Okay.
And when that followed, I actually went to FSU after my injury at Tyndall Field.
You talk about the injury. You broke several spinal discs at the age of 23.
4 and 5 were smashed after a tow motor of Pillsboro flour, for anybody that cares, fell off the back of a truck and hit me and crushed the two.
Explain what fell and hit you?
It was coming in on a pallet. And you got a manual jack, normally electric when it's doing it, and it had been going all day and it was dead. So a manual. I was actually supposed to be doing checking, making sure everything's there that's coming off, handling the crews, moving around. And with this particular thing, I went up there to help the 2 that we were left with, the 2 guys I had on this crew and the truck driver, and jacked it up and got to the back. And there was a little catch there, and when it caught, all of it come over.
And so now you're 23 years old and you're totally disabled. You're not working.
True.
And you're experiencing a lot of pain.
A lot of pain.
This is when life begins to change for you.
Yes.
Because you said you didn't like pain pills, but somebody introduced you to marijuana, and you said, hey, this works.
Not only works, I found out that lie about what an animal it makes you is only because of the illegality of it. I believe that.
Well, throughout the country now, it's legal medically.
I got a card in my pocket that says I can do all I want.
Does you have a medical marijuana
Yes,
card
I
now?
have. Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Which is, so how do you feel now, having spent 41 years in prison for basically selling marijuana, and now you can get a card?
License, it cost me about 195 and no, 190 and 75, about $265. Would you like to see the license?
So here's a
It's like a driver's license if you haven't seen.
But
one.
so someone introduced you to marijuana.
Yes.
You determined that it helped the pain that you were dealing with.
At the time that I got it introduced, it was even more. I, for about 6 months, was taking Valium, another muscle relaxer. I had like 3, Darvon Compound 65 that junkies would take apart to get the little ball of real stuff in the middle. And I'm sitting in front of a TV, a color TV, brand new, and I was about to put my foot in it because I'm sitting watching soap operas. Never in my wildest dreams did I see me doing this. I hadn't before. And I knew I had to get off of it. It was just incapacitating me.
So you start actually selling marijuana to offset the cost for your personal use.
Yes.
I believe you said you would buy 6 ounces of marijuana for $60. And
75, I think it was.
And then you would
Sell
you would sell 4 and keep 2 for yourself.
Right. That was the way it started. Went to pounds.
1972, 1973, you start escalating. Now you're starting to make some money. You're escalating sales, and you bought and sold 2 pounds.
I bought 2 pounds, sold it by the ounce. The same guys come back. They want pounds, and
so then
I
you
went
bought
to a guy, got 20 pounds, and then I'm down in Mexico like I got good sense.
Well, when you buy 20 pounds, how do you sell it? By the pound now?
Yes, or even quarter.
Quarter ounces?
Quarter
pounds. Yeah.
And was this
like
as
I made my buys.
as this was occurring? Is this your only form of income at this point?
No,
Did you get disability at all?
No, I had disability. I had full disability, and I have now.
So income-wise, you were doing fine because you owned a home.
I was living in a home I was buying. I had an automobile, even had a little boat with a 20-horse Mercury, that country boys like. And ever since, we could have made it. But I realized we were never going to be above that.
Right.
And
so you have the
means to get a home with a swimming pool, big nice boat, the things that we call success.
So you have a bright idea. You're going to travel to Matamoros, Mexico, south of Brownsville, Texas, and buy 100 pounds of marijuana.
Yes.
Talk about that.
I don't know what to say except I had met a guy. We went down into Matamoros, hooked up with a connection, 2 brothers. One's in Brownsville and one's on the border.
Now, you connected with 2 people. Did you set that up before you went down?
He actually did. I met them, but he was the one. He was the connection.
So how much did 100 pounds of marijuana cost you in U.S. dollars?
$6,000.
Now, how did you get 100 pounds of marijuana over the border?
That's the interesting part. The brothers on each side literally floated across the Rio Grande.
Wow. Wow.
With 100 pounds of...
Yeah, not at one load.
Okay.
But they had to work, but they were glad to do it. This is money that they were making for them at the time, $6,000 apparently.
So how many people was it floating across? And then
I have no idea.
You were on the
about
other
that.
side?
I only met the other 2.
Oh.
And so you never actually went into Mexico.
I went in, yeah.
Okay.
So I went down and went into some of the places and different things. Went over there chasing girls when I shouldn't have been, but of course that's the nature of crazy young men.
Right.
How much money did your $6,000 investment on 100 pounds of marijuana make you?
I really don't know. I know that you tend to spend what you have because you can't go buy a new house on it or even a new automobile. So you go out to eat and you do other things, but I have no idea really.
But now you didn't need to
I
go
know that I would, any time that you mess with drugs, you double your money. You can't double.
How many times did you travel to Mexico to buy 100 pounds of marijuana?
Once I got it set up, I used the intermediary. I just wanted to meet the people that were necessary, as stupid as it was. I had this guy who did it.
But this is where I think your high IQ as a child helped you, because putting these things together isn't exactly easy, and you seem to be able to do this pretty easily.
It does seem to work that way.
Yeah.
I was telling Tim coming up, my first 20 years, I lived with one leg on each side of the fence with my desire to know God, and was known by officers and everyone alike that I was the one that had marijuana in the prison.
But then
by
you
the
didn't.
pound.
But you didn't need to go to Mexico anymore. You found a chain of distribution in the States.
Yes.
And how long? So that was about 1977, correct?
And probably closer to 75 and first part of 76.
Okay. Now, the life-changing event in your life, January 23rd of 1977, Sandy Creek, which became the Sandy Creek murders. You were asked to participate in unloading 40,000 pounds of marijuana from a shrimp boat called the Gunsmoke to refrigerated trucks that would haul it away, correct?
Correct.
Talk about that.
I had met this nut, there's Bob Vines. It was known as Lying Bob. There was another Bob that was involved in things, and he liked to drive Cadillacs and wear a suit, so he was high-rolling Bob. To differentiate when we were talking among ourselves, and they're not really personally present. So he had hooked up a way that he was covering himself for being involved in this smuggling operation, and apparently went to an FBI agent and was giving them enough information that if he got caught, he'd have a way out, which is what he ended up doing.
Well, he went to Bobby Joe Vines. He actually set this operation up with some FBI agent named Donald Baldwin, correct?
That is correct.
And he set it up so he couldn't lose because they were after some other big-time drug dealers named, I believe, Floyd and David Capo, correct?
True.
So the FBI didn't even care if Bobby Joe Vines made money or not because they were after the bigger fish, correct?
Absolutely, and that was one of the things that helped me in getting paroled. It was like 40 years and some. I am sitting there with like the 8th parole hearing coming up, being denied over and over, and this FBI agent, who is Gary Yates, a very good friend now. He was working as FBI. He actually lived, as I may have told you, he was on my paper route. He was, of course, younger, but I threw papers to his mother and got to know her well. And when it all came down, his mom told him, says, "That's a good boy. That's not him." And so he stepped forward and had the story of how the FBI involvement reached that peak. And it was due to, after Hoover's fall, the DEA and others who were doing drugs busts became the front page, and they were looking to get back into some kind of celebratory standing, and so they started with an intent of going after drugs.
But if we go back to your desire to provide financial security for your family, because remember, you're disabled at this point.
True.
You want to make money for your family. You want to make sure that they're okay if you can't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I remember you told me, this is interesting, because you told me that you felt your ship had come in, right?
Yes.
Right? You were disabled. You weren't
Literally.
working. Yeah, literally. And it's interesting because in World War II, they would say loose lips sink ships.
Yes.
And that's really what happened here, because ultimately, and we'll get to that, the Gunsmoke gets sunk because of loose lips. So, all right, now Bobby Joe Vines set this whole thing up. Now, who hired you to be part of this?
Bob Vines did. That was the story that was really interesting. He wanted to know where it could be unloaded. He was telling Don Baldwin it was going to be in Louisiana. So they're setting up, trying to wait to make the bus, and he's bringing it in somewhere else. Through me, I was supposed to pick a spot, being familiar with that area, and that's why we ended up in Panama City at Sandy Creek.
And what would your payment be for this operation?
For this one, I was supposed to get it like 1,000 pounds. It was sold $250.
So it wasn't money. You were getting 1,000 pounds of
1,000 pounds,
marijuana.
I'd have to get rid of it. But you remember, I have my connection set up now. I can give a 100-pound lot to one of 3 different guys. And
Financially, what would that mean for you? 1,000 pounds of marijuana.
At that time, I should have been able to walk away with 100,000.
A lot of money.
Actually, more than that, but I also was given the task of finding 3 to help. One was a friend of mine that actually lived with me at one time who was a boat captain. So he brought it up the intercoastal waterway out of Panama City to Sandy Creek.
That was Captain Peter Van Stroop?
No, this was Steve Long. Peter Van Estrup actually brought it from South America.
Okay.
Run into a fierce storm, lost the windows, shoot up their gas, and they ran out of gas off of Panama City.
But not to put in, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because you ended up selling 1,000 pounds of marijuana. I believe you made closer to about $175,000, correct?
Probably.
And that was back in 1977. I checked on Google, and the value of that today would be over $750,000.
Brand new car. I bought one with everything, $6,600.
And you provided that money to your family, and even though eventually you ended up in prison, your family got to keep that money, correct?
Them and the lawyers, they get a big hunk every time.
Yeah, they always do.
They always do.
But you had calculated a worst case scenario if you had just gotten caught on the marijuana, you'd only be in prison for a couple of years.
That was it. At the time, tonnage was 5 years. They didn't do it until in the 80s. They made it a life sentence according to that amount. I don't know. I know it got progressively more as according to the weight. But at that time, it was 5 years. I was college graduate, family, never been in trouble. I figured most 2 years, and I know some that I originally started with where my connection come out of got busted, and that was the most one of them did, and he actually walked off from Eglin where they don't have fences, and he got caught going off to meet his girlfriend, didn't get back in time.
So the calculation for you was, okay, I'm going to do this, help these guys smuggle all this marijuana into the country. I'm going to get 1,000 pounds of it. And if I get caught at worst, I'll spend a couple years in jail, but I'm setting up my family for the future. That was the calculation.
Yeah, I couldn't make that much in 10 years.
Right.
If I was working at a good college-educated job.
Yeah.
So the actual unloading of marijuana was supposed to happen on the 22nd, but there were some problems with the boat, correct?
Ran out of gas.
Ran out of gas. So you guys show up on January 23rd, and you guys are ready to go.
Right.
All right. Now, they used your van. Your van was given to a man named Walter Steinhorst, correct?
Yes.
Now, and why?
I willingly put it in his hands. It was set up with CB, shipped to shore, and
a police scanner.
police scanner.
Right. So you guys were all set up with your van.
Basically monitoring the worst is somehow something happened and the police coming in on us.
You get a jump on it.
We got a little warning.
Yeah.
So you guys were at the water to unload the marijuana from the shrimp boat Gunsmoke onto refrigerated trucks. 1.1 miles down the road is Walter Steinhorst in your van as a lookout to make sure nobody comes.
Look out in 2 of the 10-wheelers. You couldn't put them refrigerated trucks all down on this same little dirt road that beat back down to Sandy Creek.
Now Steinhorst was armed.
Yes, he was. Everyone knew it.
So what happened? Somebody came. Some people drove up. What happened?
Apparently, and according to him, at least with the first one, when I found them, he had killed one of the the older one of these 4 people. He had got the other 3 out of the vehicle, and he was getting them out, telling them it was a police thing. They were going to have to wait a few minutes, and when the other one came out, they came out with a sawed-off shotgun, got 1 blast.
Well, now hold on a second. They pull in a pickup truck. There's 2 men and 2 very young ladies, correct? Sisters?
Girls, sisters.
Right. So then a guy named Sims.
Harold Sims.
Harold
first one.
Sims. He apparently had been drinking pretty heavily, I read.
Always did. He was a cab driver. He was not, the outstanding citizen. He was out.
So you knew him from before.
I knew of him and heard more later.
Because it's a small community you're living in.
Very small community. They were all from Springfield, where basically I was raised at.
So Harold Sims challenges Steinhorst, and he pulls a gun out and points it at Steinhorst, correct?
Sawed-off shotgun, got 1 round. Steinhorst fell to his knee against the passenger door shot twice. One of them went straight through everything, all vital organs.
So he killed Harold Sims.
Yes.
Steinhorst killed Harold Sims. And then the other 3 are taken out of the truck and they're tied up.
They are tied up, placed in the van, in the back of the van where there is a bed, and are sitting across that. The idea being that they would be held till we finish unloading. I mean, we're just barely into it. I think I told you we probably got away with half of the load, and we kept unloading afterwards.
Now, clarify this, please. You know, the police report sort of indicated that this 2 guys came, with 2 girls down, in a lover's lane type situation. But apparently there were 52 pages of notes suppressed that really reflected that they came in to rob you guys of marijuana.
Potentially, that was what was going to happen. And it seemed to the other young man, Doug Hood, was waiting trial for drug charges of robbing a drugstore. So these were not first-class citizens. That takes away nothing that they should have ever lost their life, certainly the 2 young girls. But they've got these 2 young girls out there. If they were there for the purpose of romance, 20 miles out in the woods, so cold, it was when they had the snow down here in 77, January.
Sure.
They embargoed the trucks going back and forth. We're checking them. We literally had to carry the marijuana into Georgia because it was supposed to come south, but the embargo, they were checking.
But don't you find it a little peculiar that they would go there and bring 2 young girls like that if it was in fact a robbery? I mean, what would be the purpose of taking those 2 young girls with them?
Under normal circumstances, it would have allowed them to get in close enough to take over. I'm sure they didn't, I don't think, suspect an armed guard, but they got to be able to get in there and control the crowd. It may not have been that. I know I talked to Steinhorst right after it happened, and the adrenaline, his telling of it, and this man did not show emotions at all.
Well, if it came out that they were there to rob you, it certainly would have changed the scope of the trial.
Absolutely. It would be much later that we found out about it. Lawyers in big businesses of law would take over when a death warrant was signed. And when Steinhorst's came up, the state of Florida gives you a direct appeal to Florida Supreme Court with a death penalty. After that, they do not provide legal help.
So you were 1.1 miles away when Harold Sims was shot and killed.
True.
And were you consulted at all about the decision to tie these other people up?
I don't remember it. I certainly had no control. That's what the FDLE agent said.
Yeah, I read in some old documents that you thought that these people would be driven away and let go.
I told him to do it because Doug Hood, I know what he's about. He was waiting on drug charge. My idea was to give him £1,000.
And let him go.
Let him go. No, I'm sorry, 100 pounds and $10,000.
Were you armed as well at the time or no?
No, I had the gun, but I didn't have it.
Okay.
All right. So now there's a ship-to-shore radio. David Capo, who the son of the 2 guys that the FBI is after, he's on the Gunsmoke.
True. At this time.
So he hears on the radio that somebody's been shot. David Capo, he terminates the operation.
Actually, it was not. We were not transmitting anything like that. They actually, one of the 3 aluminum boats pulling raft that had to go out of Sandy Creek into the mouth of the Intercoastal and load this marijuana to bring to the hill at Sandy Creek. One of them went out there and told them.
Okay, so David Capo finds out, somebody's been killed.
Clean this up.
Operations terminated.
Yeah.
So now he decides he orders the Gunsmoke driven down to St. Petersburg.
I'm not sure where they were ordered to go. That's where they sank it.
So the Gunsmoke was sunk in somewhere. Well, I guess I'm saying St. Petersburg, but you're not sure where.
No, it's around St. Petersburg. I do know that, but who gave whether he said that's where we'll sink it or not, I don't know.
How much of the marijuana was still left on the ship that wasn't unloaded?
About half of it. There was at least 20,000 pounds.
20,000 pounds, and Wow. So how did they find the gun smoke? Was it half submerged or was it all the way at the bottom?
It was to the bottom. Apparently, somebody seen the oil slick that had came up from it, and apparently Capo was not aware that that would happen. So they called in case there has been some kind of catastrophe where a boat has went down that people might be on, and the Marine Patrol came in on it.
And what did the police do? Did they look for the owner of the boat?
I would assume that would be the next thing. Yes.
And then I guess they must have contacted Captain Von Stoop.
Peter Van Estrup. E-S-T-R-U-P.
Stoop. Okay.
Yeah, close.
Close. All right. So now at this point,
But they didn't actually contact him. They would get back to Bob Vines. That would start the trail when they brought him in and started interrogating.
okay, hold on now. The ship is sunk. How did the police then get to Bob Vines?
It was when they found the bodies, about 8 months later.
Oh, that was later.
Yeah.
So all right. So this ship is sunk. And there's
No follow-up.
Bales of marijuana floating all over the place, probably. But that's it. You don't hear anything.
Nothing.
So nothing happens then for 6 or 8 months until the bodies are found.
True.
All right.
And until the bodies were found, were you aware that they were killed?
Oh, yeah. Knew
Okay.
immediately. Or
Okay.
at least afterwards.
Okay.
And you knew, obviously,
Next morning.
so you knew where they were.
Yeah.
Apparently they were.
No, I knew generally. I was told a place called, I think, Moody's Pasture out of Perry, Florida.
They were shot.
In a sinkhole.
They were shot, killed, and put down a sinkhole.
Yes.
How were the bodies found?
Apparently 2 young boys who dove in these things because they can be quite deep, hunting for Indian artifacts, went in and went down and seen some bones and come up out of there hollering and went and got the police, and they sent them back down, and on the way they find 2 more sets of bones, and they come out of there, and they brought the Navy in. Out of Panama City's got a big Navy base.
For the time that these people were missing,
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 2 young girls. I think they were 14 and 16.
16, yes.
Was there, a massive search in the area for them? Was there a lot on the news about
Apparently
it?
not. I mean, there was some,
Okay.
and it happened the same night. They began to put everything together once they had the bodies, but basically it was a missing person, and
Right.
they would just nowhere
So-
to ever be found.
So Walter Steinhorst, he drove them in your van up to this place, was what, 125, 150 miles away?
Probably 120, maybe a little more.
Was he the one who killed all 3 of them? The 3
According to
remaining?
the man that was with him, I don't have any knowledge except for that.
And that was Charles Hughes.
Yes,
So Charles Hughes says that Steinhorst killed the other 3.
right.
And then what was Charles Hughes's involvement? Because he was his
He
right
went to
hand.
Perry, Florida, and got some baling wire and some blocks to tie the people to and throw them in for sinking their bodies in the sinkhole.
So he was an accessory after the fact of the murders, he says.
He drove the van there, and whether he knew that was what was going to be done or not, or did, he did testify. They didn't catch him for 4 years, and then when they did, and he was having his trial, that was his story, is that he drove them there at Steinhorst's orders, that Steinhorst told him to go get baling wire and bricks or blocks, and he would go do that, but he said he heard the gunshots as he left.
Was Steinhorst seems like an animal? I mean, in essence.
There's no doubt.
Did other people that were there, including you, feel threatened by him?
Of course, after the first incident, there was supposedly Bob Vines had recruited these 2 hitmen. It turns out that where he got his hair done, the hairdresser was the wife of Charlie Hughes. And from there, he was getting back up. He was literally, it came to be, hunting for protection for his back. And because he knew that he was working with the FBI, and we didn't. So,
Now, based on the dates that these 4 people were reported missing, now they've been found at the bottom of a sinkhole. Based on the dates that they were reported missing and the dates of all the Gunsmoke being sunk, the police put 2 and 2 together and they figured that there's some kind of a connection, right?
Yes, because initially they found 31 bales floating when in Panama City, which is like 20 miles from Sandy Creek, and these people came up missing out of Panama City. They made the connection.
So the police are saying, okay, now we had this smuggling operation with this boat and these bales of marijuana. 4 people end up dead, and they know there's a connection. Who do the police go to first?
I really don't know. We do know that in time, apparently, Customs had figured it out, and DEA right after the smuggling, because that would have been their venue and that's where they operated from. But as they did, they found a boat that Bob Vines had bought, one of 3 that was used to be pulled out there and loaded marijuana on. It was tied back to him.
Okay.
And the FBI, knowing that that's the confidential informant that has caused this chaos, told Custom and DEA, we've got it. There's going to be a bigger thing. We're working on getting that. And they backed up, and they never followed.
So Bob Vines gave the police the name of the 14 or 17 guys that were loading and unloading. So all of you, including you, everybody's initially charged with murder?
3rd degree at that point.
Third degree, everybody.
Grand jury indicted.
Then 14 are granted immunity
Yes.
to testify against 3 in particular.
True.
And you happen to be one of the 3.
Yes, I was.
With Charles Hughes and Walter Steinhorst.
Yes.
So what were the actual charges they went after you on?
Initially, we're all arrested on 3rd degree, which they can do. For 1st degree, you have to go through a grand jury hearing. And it was at that point that the prosecutor, Leo Jones, went to seeking to cement his case. Hughes is on the run. He's got 1 person, and he cannot make a conviction with all the others turning over based on this kind of thing. So he got a 3rd man, and that was me.
And
Charlie wasn't there.
You never contemplated turning on them?
I was offered the opportunity, but in my wildest dreams, I could not see that they could convict me of 1st degree murder. And you got to remember, I come from a family. I've got a picture of my dad and his brothers and the sisters, and they look like moonshiners from the 20s, and they're young adults. You don't snitch.
Here's a question. You have 17 people that are charged with 3rd degree murder, and then it all boils down to them going after you, Steinhorst, and Hughes.
They get indictments for 1st degree murder.
Even though you were 1 1/8 miles away from the first murder.
Yes.
You were 125, 150 miles away from the other 3 murders. You never pulled a trigger. You really didn't had anything to do with the murders. What was their justification for charging you with murder?
At first, they tried to say that I had gave the order that these people recognized me, which was not the case. Mm-hmm. I had ski mask along with 3 others. It was cold. Remember again,
right.
Snow. And but then they tried to say that they recognized the van, Doug would, but actually I don't think that was ever the case. And they, one by one, they got a piece from each of those people that seemed to incriminate me, and that was what they were doing as they talked to them. And at least other than the first 4, which were the Luke Fars and Capo, who were doing it for regardless to get out of it, and the others at the directions of interrogating the others as to their freedom was able to elicit one thing that sounded nasty and not always the truth. So that's where they took to the grand jury.
Right. They were trying to say that you handed a rope.
True.
You handed the rope to Steinhorst,
yes,
who tied the 3
eventually,
surviving
that's
victims
what the
up.
prosecutor said in the closing argument.
Right. And simply because you touched the rope,
yes,
that implicated you on a felony murder charge.
True. I literally carried it up there from that unloading zone. because Charles Hughes was out on a boat when I went and told Vines, who had hired me, unknowing this guy's an FBI agent, and Charles is not there. He gave me the ropes to take it up there and make sure that Steinhorst understands, tie them people up before they do something silly, and he kills some more.
You know, I understand, you know, that why the prosecution, you know, uses the felony murder charge. But it seems like so many times we see and we talk to people where that is so misused and twisted around a little bit, no?
I absolutely agree with it, and a book was wrote about my case by a retired colonel out of the military. That's all he did. He retired from the Pentagon, writing up programs. And
the book was called Twisted Justice.
Twisted Justice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So because literally you carried the rope and you handed the rope to people to Steinhorst, who then killed those people, you were connected and you were charged with 3 first-degree felony murder charges.
Yes, sir.
But didn't the state also go after you on drug trafficking charges?
Yes, I was tried on conspiracy to import and distribute because of the amount.
And what happened with that?
Got found not guilty in a jury trial in Tallahassee based on the FBI having, through Vines, hired me entrapment.
So so you were acquitted.
Found not guilty.
Not guilty.
Luke Forrest and Capo were, and were the first ones to get immunity from the state attorney.
Let's recap for clarity purposes. So the state of Florida is going after Charles Hughes on first-degree murder.
Yes.
Whatever happened to him?
He managed to hear about it and get away. So he was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for about 4 years. He was over in Mississippi. Eventually he gets caught. They bring him back, take him to trial.
And to clarify, his involvement was he drove the victims
all the way from the unloading site to back in them woods, and then went and got the blocks and brought them back, helped with wiring people to it.
He must have gotten life in prison, right?
No.
He got 15 years.
Twisted
He
Justice.
did 5.
He got 15 years and only did 5.
Right.
And you got 3 life sentences and ended up on death row.
That was it.
So how was he finally caught? Do you know?
Just what I heard. I don't really know. I know there was a lot in the paper. He basically, from the moment they got him driving him to Tallahassee, he was exonerating me of any responsibility, saying that I had told him, and they were supposed to be turned loose when the operation was over. And he said Steinhorst told him that David doesn't run anything.
And how could he have possibly gotten only 15 years? Do you know?
He went back, and we have a different state attorney who didn't use the tactics of the first, and he got found guilty of 1 count of third. Well, they hung jury on the 3 first. He could have carried him back, but they ended up negotiating for him to take a plea to the 15 he was facing on the 3rd degree. So he had 4 15s run together.
But they were looking for him for 4 years.
For 4 years, FBI's 10 most wanted list.
I mean, one would think that might get you a few more years in jail as well.
You would think.
You know, the inconsistencies that we see in the criminal justice system are just amazing. And you just see it continually all the time.
When you're inside the system, anytime you learn that. Mostly citizens think that everybody's doing the right thing.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're seeing now that there are times when law enforcement, which we desperately need and I love now, didn't always, but we've got to have law enforcement. Unfortunately, the good ones have been reluctant to say anything against the others, and the judicial system appears to work that way all the way down.
And whatever happened to that FBI agent, Einstein, Donald Baldwin, who set up that whole deal with Bobby Joe Vines?
He got a letter of reprimand for failure to control his agent, and he would eventually retire with 20 years and go out at basically what he was, field agent, when his incident occurred. But he could have been running the FBI if he'd have made the bust.
And how about Bobby Joe Vines, the FBI informant? Whatever happened to him?
We really don't know. I had somebody that was keeping tabs for a while, and basically the last that was known is that somewhere in the Atlanta area, living with high-powered rifles and 2 attack dogs.
And he never
Yes, he
did
should.
any prison time.
No, none.
That's amazing to me because he,
Not
in
in jail.
truth, but David, wasn't the truth that he actually handed you the rope and said,
told me.
go give this to
Yeah.
Steinhorst so he can tie those people up?
Yes. But we're not looking at further potential consequences. I certainly didn't, and that you could get it for taking a rope up there. Basically, the felony murder has some virtue. You agree to go to a robbery, everybody's armed, you're driving the getaway car.
Correct.
And
Right.
they kill somebody, run out, jump in the car, and you take them away.
Yeah, you know something bad's going to happen when you have a gun on you.
No, and Andy and I talk about this. We understand why the felony murder is in place, but it seems to be misapplied so many times.
It gets mishandled according to, I believe, and many others, the approximation of an election for a state attorney.
Correct.
High-profile cases are great publicity for the job they're doing. The prosecutor at that time, Leo Jones, is the same one who sent Pitts and Lee, a name that may be remembered,
Yeah, sure.
that the governor finally had to let out because the court overturned their conviction once, and Leo Jones got them convicted and sent them back to death row again.
Whatever
governor asked
happened
you
to Floyd and David Capo, the son? Whatever happened to them? They were the ones that this whole thing was set up to get.
David ended up staying. The Luke Forest took off. They had a place in South America. This prosecutor, Leo Jones, state attorney, when they were found guilty, which the federal trial was first, then he got them an appeal bond so that they could testify against me and against Steinhorst and Hughes if he'd have been there. And as soon as they get through with that and have sealed their no conviction on murder, they took off. David Capo stayed, did 18 months, I believe it was.
He was sentenced, I think, to 5 years, but only did 18 months.
in the federal system.
And
none in the state because he testified.
And Floyd, the father, who was really the drug kingpin of the operation they were after, he didn't do any prison time, correct?
That's correct. He was indicted based on, he was arrested on the 3rd-degree count based on Bob Vine's testimony. I happened to be the only one that could confirm what Bob Vines was saying, and I wouldn't do it.
And you wouldn't testify against Floyd. Why?
Basically what I said a while ago, you don't. I had no reason to. Basically, I could have ate the 5 years or whatever was coming
But
down.
that wouldn't have maybe kept you off of death row?
I don't think anything was going to keep me off from there, but I also had the 3 that I'd brought in that I did not want to hurt.
Okay.
Floyd was just extra.
How do you, talking to you before this program, you don't seem to be at all bitter about this.
Absolutely not.
How do you, I would probably be bitter about some of this.
Jesus Christ, and I'll say that always. That's my big thing. I believe in him. I wear hats or caps. It's got something to that effect. Prayer is an ultimate weapon. And many others that speak specifically to Jesus in my life. I get up every morning regardless of what I'm doing. I got up I intended to get up at 3. I'd failed to change my phone and it's getting older, when I crossed the time zones yesterday, coming from Panama City. So my 4 o'clock was actually, my 3 was actually off by an hour. It wouldn't hit till later.
You know, I'm curious of one other thing, if I could ask. You are now living back in where the crime was committed in Panama City.
Well, I'm actually in the next county, but it's like 45-minute drive. I'm in and out of there regular.
Do people treat you in a certain way because they know, or you don't really come across people that remember? It was a long time ago.
It was.
Okay.
But our people that know me and people who have heard the story, I have got no negative response from anyone. I have complete acceptance. Everybody feels I did wrong, and
We've got a few minutes left. I want to wrap up a couple of conclusions on what happened to a few people. Walter Steinhorst, you told me he was a cold-blooded killer. What happened to him?
He actually ended up dying after they moved death row to UCI, Union Correctional Institution, formerly known as Rayford and the Rock. He died from diabetes complications. He'd lost a leg, went blind.
Yeah. He was convicted on four murders, but he was sentenced to 3 death sentences, right?
They did not give him a death sentence for
Sims.
Apparently believing that Harold Sims did take a shot at him.
And then Steinhorst died on death row in 1999, but he was on death row for 20 years.
Yes.
All right. In conclusion, last up, David Monroe Goodwin, you never pulled a trigger. You never tied anybody up. You were 150 miles away from any killing at all. And the jury finds you guilty. 3 counts, first-degree felony murder. What went through your mind when they said guilty?
That's the only time I really felt the impact. I had thought maybe I would be found guilty of 3rd, not 1st. And I actually felt my knees weakening to the point that I literally had to lock them to stay upright, because you stand up when the verdict is read.
Now, I believe this was a very political trial. There was a media frenzy. So the jury recommended life with 25 years mandatory, correct?
This was apparently the way they overcame a hung decision at one point, is that whoever was trying to go for lesser agreed to go with the first if everybody recommended mercy, and they did.
So what happens? The judge took actions into his own hands, correct? What happened?
There are last I knew, I think, 2 states where that can happen. Florida is one of them. He overrode the jury recommendation. They have a number of checkpoints in place for that to be did. And on appeal, 3.5 years later, they seen that he did not follow the checkpoints. And so I was sentenced to life.
So he sentenced you to death.
Where he sent me to death.
So the judge overrode the jury and,
Yes.
and gave you not 1, 3 death sentences.
3 death sentences.
I guess in case the first 2 didn't work.
Yeah, I really wasn't worried about the other 2.
Yeah. What was your reaction when he actually did that and gave you 3 death sentences?
Ironically, I was smiling by the 2nd and 3rd
Could
for
you-
the irony of it. But when they had a detective assigned to me, there was some thought that I may be killed. They'd got some things at different times. They reacted accordingly. So I've got a detective armed with me, and he is literally shaking. And he said, "I don't know how you're doing it." I said, "It's nothing. It's what it is."
You didn't think your life was over at that point?
I still couldn't believe that I'd been convicted, so of course it wasn't over. Somewhere they were going to straighten up this.
David, you have been an outstanding guest. I can't believe we're out of time for this first segment, and I know we're going to do a part 2 on this show. But you are a fantastic guest, and thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
That does it for today. Special thanks to Don Kassler in upstate New York, who wrote, "Well done, Chris. You guys are doing a great service introducing this segment of society. There is no other way to understand this interesting insight into these reformed assets of our society." Thank you so much for writing, Don, and letting us know you're enjoying the episodes. Thank you all so much for watching, and please join us next week for part 2 of this story with David Goodwin, as David talks about life on death row, surviving 41 years in Florida's most violent prisons, and his altercation with serial killer Ted Bundy.